My parents kicked me out at 18 to make room for my pregnant sister. Now they're begging for help, but I revealed a secret that shattered their world. The sting of being cast out by my own family still lingers, a wound that hasn't fully healed even a year later. At 19, I'm still grappling with the reality that my parents forced me out of our home just weeks after my 18th birthday, during the chaos of high school finals week. The timing was cruel, amplifying the stress of exams with the devastation of having nowhere to go. If not for my best friend and her parents, who welcomed me into their home with unwavering kindness, I don't know where I'd be. Their generosity gave me a safe haven, a stark contrast to the rejection I faced from my own kin. The reason for my eviction was my older half-sister, Sasha, whose pregnancy prompted my parents to prioritize her needs over mine, demanding I vacate my room to make space for her return. The decision wasn't just logistical, it was a painful confirmation of my place, or lack thereof, in our fractured family. Our family's history is a tangled web of relationships and choices that shape the dynamics I've endured. My mother's story began in college, where a brief romance with my stepfather, Jacob, resulted in Sasha's birth just months before her graduation. They were too young to marry, their connection more fleeting than enduring, so they parted ways. Jacob, determined to be a father, stayed involved, co-parenting Sasha while maintaining contact with my mother. When Sasha was 3, my mother met my biological father, a man she dated for 2 years before they married. Their union was short-lived. A year into their marriage, my mother became pregnant with me. My father, unready for the responsibility, urged her to end the pregnancy, but she refused. Their disagreement led to a bitter separation, and by the time I was born, my father had died, leaving my mother to sever ties with his family entirely. She rekindled her relationship with Jacob, who had lingered in her life, perhaps out of unresolved love. They married a few years after her divorce was finalized, raising me and Sasha together. But to Jacob, I was never truly his daughter, more a burden he tolerated than a child he embraced. Growing up, I felt the weight of that distinction every day. Jacob's coldness was palpable, a quiet disdain that colored our interactions from my earliest memories. Sasha, 6 years my senior, mirrored his attitude, treating me with the same indifference. My mother insisted she loved me as much as she loved them, but her words felt hollow against their actions. I tried, as a child, to win their affection, hoping for a bond that would make us a family. But their rejection was consistent, a wall I couldn't breach. As I grew older, I stopped trying, accepting the painful truth that Jacob and Sasha saw me as an outsider. My mother, though kinder, never acknowledged their behavior, leaving me to navigate the hurt alone. I clung to my relationship with her, hoping it would anchor me, but even that bond proved fragile when tested. The moment that shattered any remaining illusions came a year ago, 2 days before my high school finals. Sasha, then 24, announced her pregnancy. She and her boyfriend, together since their high school days, lived in a modest apartment near our house. I assumed they'd stay there, raising their child in their own space. But Sasha had other plans. Working from home while her boyfriend traveled occasionally for his job, she felt uneasy alone in their apartment. She also saw an opportunity to save on rent by moving back home, with her boyfriend in tow. My parents and Sasha decided she should return, a decision that seemed reasonable until it came at my expense. They informed me I had to give up my room, temporarily, they claimed, for Sasha and her growing family. Her old room, converted into Jacob's office after she left for college, was no longer an option. The living room, they insisted, wasn't suitable for her either. My room, my sanctuary, was the only solution they considered. The demand felt like a betrayal, not just of my space but of my place in the family. I was in the midst of preparing for finals, my senior year hanging in the balance, and they expected me to uproot my life for Sasha's convenience. I protested, arguing that Sasha had never treated me like family, so I owed her nothing. My parents tried to reason with me, framing it as a temporary sacrifice for the family's sake, but their logic rang hollow. The argument escalated, voices rising until Jacob's patience snapped. He declared I had to leave by the end of the week, wielding my legal adulthood like a weapon to justify their decision. I turned to my mother, desperate for her to intervene, to choose me just once. But she sided with Jacob, her words cutting deeper than any before. They needed space for their real grandkids. That phrase confirmed what I'd always felt: Sasha and Jacob were her true family, and I was expendable. The rejection left me reeling. I packed my belongings in a daze, ignoring the exam looming the next day. Neither my mother nor Jacob tried to stop me as I left, their silence a final confirmation of their priorities. With nowhere else to turn, I arrived at my best friend's doorstep, tears blurring my vision as I recounted the ordeal. Her family's warmth enveloped me, offering a room and a sense of belonging I'd never known at home. I had no other family to rely on, Jacob's relatives had always disliked me, and my mother had painted her own family as villains who abandoned her when she chose to keep Sasha. She claimed they'd pressured her to focus on her studies, cutting ties when she defied them. They were absent from her life, from her weddings, and from our births, leaving me with no relatives to call on in my hour of need. Living with my best friend's family, I waited for my mother to reach out, to show some sign of regret. Months passed, and her silence spoke louder than words. I heard through friends that Sasha had given birth, still living with my parents, likely to save money while her boyfriend settled in. Their social media posts, brimming with pride over their new family, felt like a mockery of my pain. I pushed it aside, focusing on my future. Graduating high school was a triumph, but college loomed as a new challenge without parental support. My best friend's parents let me stay rent-free, but I couldn't ask them to cover tuition, not with their own children to support. I applied for scholarships, leveraging my strong academic record, and secured one that covered 60% of my tuition at a university, not my dream school, but a practical choice. A student loan, co-signed by my best friend's parents, bridged the gap. I promised to repay it myself, working through college to prove I could stand on my own. The work is grueling, balancing shifts with studies, but each step forward feels like a victory. I've learned to find pride in my resilience, in building a life without the family that cast me out. My mother's sudden email last week, after a year of silence, caught me off guard. She claimed she, Jacob, and Sasha missed me, admitting they'd treated me unfairly and inviting me home to reconcile. The words were too polished, too convenient, and my instincts screamed caution. I didn't respond, and when another email followed, I ignored it too. The timing felt suspicious, their remorse too sudden to be genuine. My focus remains on my new life, on the family I've found in my best friend's parents, and on the future I'm building, one hard-earned step at a time. The sting of betrayal cut deepest when my parents demanded I make a family sacrifice for my sister Sasha's pregnancy. Their timing couldn't have been worse, right before my first high school exam, with 2 weeks of grueling tests looming. I was already drowning in stress, my mind consumed with study notes and deadlines, but their focus was solely on Sasha. They expected me to step aside, to give up my place in our home to accommodate her and her unborn child. I refused, my voice trembling with defiance. Sasha had never treated me like family, her cold indifference a constant reminder of my outsider status. Why should I sacrifice anything for her? My parents tried to reason with me, but their logic felt like a betrayal. The argument escalated until Jacob, my stepfather, snapped. He declared I had until the end of the week to leave, wielding my legal adulthood like a weapon. He made it clear, this was his house, and he decided who stayed. I looked to my mother, hoping she'd defend me, but her words shattered any lingering illusions. They needed space for their real grandkids, she said, dismissing me as if I were a stranger. Those words, real grandkids, confirmed what I'd always suspected. My mother, Sasha, and Jacob were a family, and I was merely an appendage. Devastated, I began packing that night, my exam the next day forgotten. Their silence as I gathered my belongings spoke volumes, their priorities were painfully clear. With nowhere else to turn, I showed up at my best friend's doorstep, tears streaming down my face as I recounted the ordeal. Her family welcomed me with open arms, offering a room and a sense of belonging I'd never known at home. You might wonder why I didn't seek out other relatives, but I had none to call on. Jacob's family had always disliked me, their disdain palpable at every forced gathering. My mother's family was a mystery. She'd told me her parents abandoned her when she became pregnant with Sasha, pressuring her to prioritize her studies over motherhood. Defiant, she kept Sasha, cutting ties with them. They weren't at her weddings or present for Sasha's birth or mine. With no family to lean on, my best friend's parents became my lifeline, their kindness a stark contrast to the rejection I'd faced. Living with them, I kept hoping my mother would reach out, a flicker of remorse prompting her to make amends. I held no such hope for Jacob or Sasha, knowing they were likely relieved to be rid of me. But my mother's silence hurt most of all. Months passed, and my hope faded. A year later, I learned through friends that Sasha had given birth, still living with my parents, probably to save on rent. Their social media posts, filled with gushing pride over their new family member, felt like another slap. I pushed the pain aside, focusing on rebuilding my life. After graduating high school, I faced college without parental support. My best friend's family let me stay rent-free, but I couldn't ask them to cover tuition, not with their own children to support. Determined to succeed, I applied for scholarships, leveraging my strong academic record. I secured one from a university, not my top choice, but a practical option that eased the financial burden. The scholarship covered 60% of my tuition, and I took out a student loan, with my best friend's parents as co-signers. I promised they'd never have to repay it, vowing to work through college to cover the costs myself. Balancing a job and studies is grueling, but every small victory, every passing grade, every paycheck, feels like a triumph. I hadn't heard from my family in over a year, so my mother's sudden email last week caught me off guard. She invited me home for the weekend, claiming she, Jacob, and Sasha missed me and regretted their unfair treatment. Her words were oddly polished, almost rehearsed, and my instincts screamed that something was amiss. I didn't respond. Days later, another email arrived, but I ignored it too. The sudden remorse after a year of silence felt too convenient, too calculated. The truth came to light 2 days ago when my maternal grandparents contacted me. I was stunned. They were strangers to me, their existence shrouded in my mother's tales of abandonment. They'd tracked me down through a high school friend, my best friend, who trusted them enough to share my number. I'm grateful she kept it a surprise. Their call was a revelation. Hesitant at first, I agreed to a FaceTime call, where they showed me old photo albums of my mother as a child and teenager. Their familiar features and earnest voices convinced me they were real. Tears welled up as we talked, an unexpected wave of emotion I couldn't explain. I shared my story, trying to skirt around my parents, but they already knew the painful truth. They revealed why they hadn't reached out sooner. My parents had kept them at arm's length. My mother's narrative, that her parents abandoned her over Sasha's pregnancy, was only half true. They hadn't opposed her motherhood but disapproved of Jacob, a known addict from their shared hometown. They'd attended the same high school and college, witnessing his struggles firsthand. They supported her pregnancy, offering financial help if she left Jacob, whose influence they feared. After much deliberation, she ended things with him, and they took full custody of Sasha, limiting Jacob to supervised visits. He eventually got clean, but his frequent relapses eroded their trust. They introduced my mother to my father, a family friend's son, hoping for stability. They married, but a year later, she began an affair with Jacob, resulting in my birth. She confessed to my father, unable to let Jacob go. Her infidelity led to their divorce, and she later married Jacob. My mother's claim that my father opposed my birth was a lie. Paternity tests confirmed I was my biological father's daughter, not Jacob's, a relief that grounded me. My father had partial custody until his death in a car accident when I was 7 months old, a loss that allowed my mother to rewrite history. His family cut contact, and she embraced their absence. My grandparents were furious when they learned of her affair. They issued an ultimatum: leave Jacob and salvage her marriage, or lose their support. She chose Jacob, who'd been clean for a year. That choice marked their final rift. They tried to reconnect after my birth, eager to meet me, but Jacob refused, resentful of their past judgment. My mother rejected their efforts, and their attempts to reach out every few months were met with silence. Years later, when my mother and Jacob faced financial hardship, they turned to my grandparents, who, in a gesture of hope, gave them a house 6 years ago to foster closeness. Learning this history reshaped my understanding of my family. My grandparents' persistence, despite my mother's rejection, showed their love for me. Their recent discovery of my eviction, through neighbors and my best friend, ignited their resolve to act. They were done with my mother's lies, ready to prioritize the grandchild they'd never met. As I process their story, I'm struck by the weight of their sacrifice and the pain of my mother's betrayal. I've built a life without her, supported by my best friend's family and my own resilience. The scholarships, the loans, the late-night shifts, they're proof of my strength. My grandparents' call has opened a door to a family I never knew, and I'm cautiously hopeful. But my mother's emails, dripping with false remorse, are a reminder of her selfishness. I won't respond, not yet, maybe not ever. My focus is on my future, on the possibility of a family that values me, and on the healing that comes with truth. The move to our new home marked a turning point in my life, a stark contrast to the cramped apartment we'd left behind. It was a beautiful house in a desirable neighborhood, far beyond what I thought my parents, a receptionist and a struggling salesman, could afford. The truth unraveled slowly. My grandparents had funded the purchase, a generous act that went unacknowledged by my parents' ungrateful hearts. Despite knowing the house was a gift from my grandparents, my mother refused to mend the fractured bond with them. She claimed she needed time, a vague excuse she wielded for years, delaying reconciliation with no intention of following through. My grandparents, patient and hopeful, gave her space, reaching out periodically only to be met with silence. Eventually, they sent a heartfelt letter, expressing regret for past mistakes and asking only for family photos to know we were safe. To my surprise, my mother complied, sending occasional updates that became their only connection, a fragile, distant thread that was both touching and heartbreaking. When my grandparents shared this history with me, I was overwhelmed with emotion. Tears streamed down my face as I realized I'd misjudged them, painting them as the villains in a story my mother had crafted. They weren't the cold, distant figures I'd imagined. They were loving, remorseful, and desperate to reconnect. My grandfather's recent heart issues had forced them to confront their mortality, igniting a fierce determination to heal old wounds before it was too late. A few weeks ago, they visited my mother's house, the one they technically owned, as their names remained on the deed. My mother had no choice but to let them in. The visit was tense. They learned they were great-grandparents through my sister Sasha's child, a revelation that brought joy but also unease. When they inquired about me, my parents spun a flimsy lie, claiming I was away at college, swamped with exams. They couldn't even name a school, a detail that sparked suspicion. My grandparents, unwilling to accept vague answers, spoke to neighbors. A neighbor's son, my former schoolmate, revealed the painful truth. I'd been kicked out a year ago and had been living with my best friend's family ever since. The betrayal cut them deeply. Furious, they confronted my mother, wielding her own cruel words against her. Years ago, she'd called me her only real child, dismissing my worth. Now, my grandparents turned the phrase back on her, declaring me their only real grandchild and demanding that her family vacate the house to make room for me. My best friend, who had been my rock, ensured they knew exactly how to hit that nerve. It became clear why my parents were suddenly eager to reconcile. They faced losing the home my grandparents had provided. My grandparents waited a few days before contacting me, nervous about how I'd react after years of estrangement. They were done waiting for my mother's empty promises, tired of being strung along. They presented me with a choice: allow my family to stay in the house if I wanted to give them a chance, or demand their eviction. They observed that no one in my mother's household seemed happy to see them during their visit, and I was the only one who showed genuine interest in rebuilding a relationship. They refused to be deceived any longer. The decision weighed heavily on me. Part of me wanted to show mercy, to give my parents and sister a chance to redeem themselves. But the hurt they'd inflicted, kicking me out at 18 during my exams, leaving me to fend for myself, cut too deep. Their actions hadn't been a mistake, they were deliberate, rooted in a selfishness I could no longer ignore. After much soul-searching, I told my grandparents I wanted my family evicted. It felt harsh, but it also felt just. They assured me they'd handle the legal complexities, urging me not to worry. My parents, especially Sasha, tried to manipulate me with guilt, but my grandparents were unmoved. Through our conversations, they learned the extent of my mother's lies, how she'd turned her grandchildren against them, poisoning their minds with false narratives. Any sympathy they once had dissolved. Sasha and her boyfriend are working adults, capable of finding their own way, just as millions do. My parents, too, would manage. I refused to feel guilty for their predicament, remembering how they showed no remorse when they abandoned me at a vulnerable time. Despite their cruelty, I thrived, excelling academically and building a life with the support of my best friend's family. My grandparents' generosity extended beyond the eviction. When they offered to pay off my student loans, I protested, insisting I could manage. But they were adamant, apologizing for not being there sooner. Their sincerity moved me, and I realized how much I'd missed having a family who cared. We have years to catch up on, but our bond is growing stronger every day. The eviction process began a few weeks ago, with my family given until the end of next month to leave. My mother, predictably, is furious. She sent me an email, dripping with false sincerity, claiming she wanted to mend our relationship to avoid losing the house. It was a stark contrast to her earlier message, laced with venom and profanity, where she wished I'd died in a car accident alongside my father. That's the mother I know, cruel, manipulative, and unapologetic. Her words no longer wound me, they're proof of her true character. I've built a new family with my grandparents, my best friend, her parents, and the relatives my mother cut off years ago, unwilling to share her life with them. It's an unconventional family, but it's mine, and I'm learning to embrace it. Returning to the house for the holidays felt surreal. My grandparents have moved in since my family's departure, transforming the space with renovations that make it feel both familiar and new. My old room, once a place of pain, now feels like a sanctuary. We're planning a Thanksgiving dinner, inviting my best friend, her parents, and some extended family my grandparents are reintroducing me to. The warmth of their presence, the laughter we share, and the promise of new memories fill me with a joy I never thought possible. My life is finally aligning, and for the first time in years, I'm truly happy. Reflecting on this journey, I see how far I've come. Being cast out at 18 forced me to find my strength, to rely on myself and the kindness of others. My best friend's family became my lifeline, offering me a home when I had none. My grandparents' re-entry into my life has been a gift, a chance to reclaim the love and connection I thought I'd lost forever. My mother's attempts to manipulate me, Her refusal to acknowledge her wrongs only solidify my resolve to move forward without her. Sasha, too, remains tethered to her own selfishness, unable to see beyond her immediate needs. But I'm no longer bound by their choices. The house, once a symbol of my parents' entitlement, now represents a fresh start. As I sit in my room, surrounded by the love of my true family, I feel a profound gratitude. The pain of the past hasn't vanished, but it's no longer my anchor. I'm free to build a future filled with hope, and I intend to make it last.